Thanks for having me.
Well, indeed, it's a pleasure to have you here. So we're going to get into some conversations. There will be an opportunity for anyone in the audience if they would like to ask a questions. We do have microphones that are set on the aisles to where you can ask your questions when we get to that point in the program. So I had the opportunity to read this outstanding book. And as I said, I came up with a few questions and I had to scale them back because when I got to about 20 questions, I said, oh, that we won't be able to get through all of that. It's obvious that the primary audience for your book are white folks who believe that they have a good relationship with black folks. Is it true? And if so, is there a secondary audience that could learn from your book?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. The primary audience for this book are people who need an on ramp to this conversation, an on ramp that makes the topic accessible to them, that is not intimidating or accusing of them. It is simply helping them figure out what's really going on with race. So in some cases, yes, that's white people who believe they have a good relationship with black people. In other cases, it's white people who aren't sure what kind of relationship they have with black people. They're trying to figure it out. But there's another audience as well, and I've found that there are African American people whose experience is similar to mine, who've been trying to articulate how they feel about their place in America, their path in America. They've been trying to figure out how to say it in a way, and they're using this book to say, this is what I've been trying to say to you. This is how I've been trying to articulate it to you. So that's who I wrote the book for, and it shows that at least early on, that's who's gravitating to the book.
Thank you. Thank you. In reading the book, it appeared um, through the messaging in the book that you seem like you withheld engaging in this conversation to preserve your brand, your opportunity for success. Is that a truthful interpretation that I took from the book? And if so, what sparked you to engage in this conversation now?
Yeah. I would have to say, in reflection, I would say, yes, that is a true articulation that I have decided, either consciously or unconsciously, to simply ignore the issues of race, at least try to ignore them the best I can, and pursue my own success. And I don't apologize for that. In the contrary, I would say it probably makes me uniquely qualified to have this conversation because I've spent the majority of my life with white people, and I've come to understand what it takes to be with them, what they need from me, and that makes me, in my opinion, more qualified to say, here's what I need from them for me now. As far as why now, I'd be lying if I didn't say I've gotten to a particular age now where, the downside doesn't scare me as much as it used to. Um, I've probably gotten to a place of business success that says to me, if it all goes to hell right now, it'll be bad, but not that bad. So there's a little bit of that I feel a little bit able. But the biggest reason I'm doing it now is I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take the accusations and the noise and the rhetoric and the things I was hearing that was evident that we weren't having a good conversation and we were not making any progress on this topic because we only could use labels and shouting and we were operating in echo chambers, and I just couldn't take that anymore. And so I decided to use what I know, and what I know is writing, and Dear White Friend is what happened.
Absolutely. So with that being said, what do you hope to accomplish
Yeah,
with the book?
I'll go back and use the words on ramp again. We've got to have a more nuanced conversation about race in this country. If you read the book, and I don't know how many people in the audience have, I make this I structure our issue with whites on top, blacks on the bottom, and everyone else in between. And I use that structure throughout the book to explain the construct of race in our country. And if we can come to a place that we can understand that construct and stop um, needing to act like it doesn't exist, then we can start to solve against it. And we're not going to get there by calling each other names and not talking to one another. And so what I hope to accomplish again is that on ramp. that people who are trying to figure out what's going on with race, why should I care, and what can I do about it? If those are the three questions you're trying to answer, this is the book to help you on that path.
And I'm so glad we're having this conversation here because we're confronted with the issue of race and the history behind it. In fact, I'll be remiss if I don't acknowledge that we have an implicit bias learning lab that is here to on-ramp, as using your word, into that thinking and that conversation. You know, we have Ryan Wynette, who manages our implicit bias learning lab. And so definitely that is something that we offer here. And so I want to segue into to talk about race in our country and that history. You stated in the book that we can't trust what we have learned about race. My question is, why can't we? And what are the implications of your assertion?
Yeah. Well, we can't trust it because we learned about it just like we learned about sex, right? I mean, you learn about sex by what your friends told you. That's not a good source. You learn about sex from what you saw on TV, right? There's just not credible sources for our education around it. And the same thing with race. You know, we learned the big milestones. Slavery happened, good white people made sure that we ended it. Then we moved on to civil rights, and Martin Luther King was good and Malcolm X was bad. And then we kind of skipped all the way up to the civil rights era when we said we're all equal. And we kind of dumped it there. And the implications of our history that's over 400 years old, we left that conversation out. The implications on wealth disparities, the implication on housing disparities, what we've done around housing laws and covenants and things of that, restrictive covenants and things of that. We left virtually all of that out. And so when we show up to talk about race, we're equally ill-equipped to talk about it because in our silos, we've got a narrative that we've created. And that narrative feeds our own reality. My narrative is different than other people's narrative. I'm not right, but I'm not completely wrong. And we've got to figure out how to have a more nuanced conversation about it. But that's why we can't trust what we've learned. We've got really bad educational process around this. And dare I say, we're trying to institutionalize not learning. And we should talk more about that when I'm sure you're not going to get away. You're not going to let me get away without talking about critical race theory. I'm sure you're not.
And that's where I'm about to go to. Absolutely. Okay. Because I get the text messages sometimes of talking about getting critical race theory out of schools.
Yeah.
I find that to be a very problematic. First of all, it's not taught in schools,
right? Because
we just talked about we haven't received a good learning about race. And so it also is, in my opinion, built to silence that conversation. So in your book, you mentioned about this reluctancy to study and learn our nation's history in the context of race. Yeah. And as I said, I instantly go back to the growing rage about critical race theory in schools. So can you expound upon the value of learning our nation's history in the context of race?
Yeah. You know, if we don't, we're going to live in silos with certain narratives that keep getting us doing the things we're doing and not enable us to work together to acknowledge the institutional, structural, systemic nature of race. We're gonna be stuck there. But I just want to call out critical race theory because now when people bring it up to me, my first question is, what is critical race theory? I just like define it. I have not found one person who can articulate, who is asking the question and can articulate a definition. But what they know is they don't like it. Now that's the definition of not being all that tied in, right? So I no longer fight the argument of critical race theory. I just ask, what is it? When they define it, I say, no, okay, so let's Google it. If I've got my phone, I'll Google it right then. And then I'll work through the definition of critical race theory and ask, which parts of this don't you like? And my white friends all say, oh, well, I don't have a problem with, and I don't have a problem with, and I don't have a problem with. So again, back to labels, I think critical race theory, like Black Lives Matter, like cancel culture, like a whole bunch of other stuff has become a label and not real meaning. And I just don't you don't see it in my book. I don't call out critical race theory. I don't call people racist. I don't call them privileged unless I articulate my own privilege. I don't, because those are labels that, quite honestly, I don't think close the gap between us. I'm not saying it's not real. My Black friends keep telling me there are real races, and I believe that's true, but they're not my friends. So I don't have to worry about them right now. I'm talking to my friends. And so I would just say to you, ask the next person that talks about critical race theory, could you just give me a definition? And most of the times, people haven't thought that deeply. They just know that they've heard that's a bad idea.
Absolutely. You have to do the work. You got to do the work. You have to do the work. During our conversations and preparations for uh, this program, um, you have suggested the era of racial awareness. You provided a unique challenge or opportunity for leaders, because what that's in this room and in live streaming are
Yeah.
leaders,
Right.
respectively.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that when you talk about the era of racial awareness?
I think that as people come back to work from COVID and we repopulate our offices, we're going to have more challenges around race than we have ever seen before. People are no longer going to put up with the BS, the subtle slights, the perceptions of not getting their fair kind of coaching and development. They're just going to be unwilling to go back into the box of what your corporation has decided success looks like. And as leaders, we're going to, if we're charged with creating an environment of engagement and we're charged with bringing the best of people, we're going to have to learn a new set of skills. A new set of skills that makes us more aware of race, more comfortable talking about it and dealing with it in the workplace. Those of you who think you're going to leave race out of the workplace, it just ain't going to happen. I have had to write more letters to my employees, and I got a lot of white employees. I've had to write more communications to them to make sure they know where I stand and where our organization stands around issues of race. Because if you don't, you're going to create an environment that's going to fester. And unlike before, where people of color will just fade into the background, you're going to lose talent. You're going to have disengaged people. You're going to have incidents happen in your workplace, and in our case, on our job sites, that are going to embarrass you. That you're going to lose. You're going to have customer challenges. As leaders, we're going to have to be more. We're going to have to manage through a better, more informed filter around the issues of race, and it's going to be a challenge for some people who don't want to do the work.
Absolutely. I know that especially with the pandemic, there's a high level of exhaustion when it comes to these continual systemic issues of race.
Well, we had a pandemic which stressed us all out, and then we had episode after episode of social injustice and high-profile situations, and I think it has created another era of racial awareness. What we're willing to put on our t-shirts, how we're willing to wear our hair, how we're willing to speak truth to power. All those things are going to be new phenomenons for leaders. We're going to have to be ready.
Absolutely. So I want to move into a portion of our conversation. What can we do about it? Once again, I want to encourage, if you have a question, write it down so that you don't lose it. I know I get a little bit older. I get a question or a thought and I lose it. And so when we get to that portion that take questions from the audience, we want to be able to do that effectively. You referred in the book to pillars of racial equity. What are those pillars, and why are you basing your entire set of solutions upon them?
Yeah, the pillars are our willingness to acknowledge we've got a systemic problem and to decide we're going to do something about it. If you won't or can't do those two things, progress is impossible, because we've been trying to solve a problem that we've not acknowledged that we've had. We really haven't. It's been difficult for our country to say, you know what, we really messed this thing up in 1619. And then we screwed it up a number of times after. And because of that, we've got a lot of racial strife and a lot of gaps in income and wealth and health and housing and all kind of stuff. And darn it, now is the time to change it. Until we do that, Chris, I'm not exactly sure how any systemic change can happen. And so I simply say, if you're not willing to acknowledge the problem and decide now it's time to fix it, then I'm really not all that interested in having a deeper conversation, because we're not going very far. We're just not going to get to the stuff that really, really matters to systemic change.
And when you say that, I think about there's been this campaign, Truth and Reconciliation, that this institution and many institutions here in Cincinnati has been a part of. And before we can have any reconciliation, we must begin with the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's if you could speak about this a little bit, I believe that's what we've been grappling with. People have tied themselves to false realities, falsehoods, fabrications, and not really dealing with the truth.
Yeah, but I get why, right? I mean, and I write about it in the book. I hope the tone of this book strikes correctly. And that is, I understand why my white friends have a certain narrative. And I ask my black friends, where would my white friends have gotten a black narrative from? They're white, they've been in white silos. So I don't blame anyone for the narrative that they have. I wrote the book because I believe my friends, when they know better, will do better. And now you can't say you don't know better. The book's what, 198 pages long? It's a relatively quick read. It's a nice on-ramp. Because if we keep blaming each other for where we are, I mean, you've heard about the whatabouts, right? I mean, I'll talk to someone about something and they'll say, well, what about teen pregnancy? What about black on black crime? What about? The whatabouts are not questions. They're statements because people don't want to acknowledge that we've got these apparent dysfunctions based on years and years and years of stuff. For example, what are the implications of inheriting poverty? 48% of all black families inherit poverty. That means more than 2 generations in poverty, when 9% of white families are in the same situation. What are the implications of you're more likely to inherit your ancestors' poverty than you are to inherit any of their money? So what does that do about education and housing and your mindset around work and your mindset around the future and your ability to hope and prosper and dream? What does that do? But we want to ignore that. Like, it just, we want to treat those things. We want to create inner city programs. The one that gets me is returning citizens. Now, I want to make sure I'm clear on this because it's being taped. The Triversity Construction Company is a place of opportunity for everyone who signs up for our five values, including people who have spent time in prison. But if we believe that our solution to a systemic problem is to help people who have already been to prison get jobs, they're nuts. The systemic problem is, why are they going to prison at such alarming numbers? So I want to get to systemic issues. Now, we do need to close the gap right now, and I call a number of those solutions in the book, but I also want to get to the systemic things. And to do that, we've got to acknowledge we got a problem. We got to decide. We got to get to it. That was a long answer, Chris. It feels long. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. You say on the cover of the book, and again in the book, my friend, I do not believe you are a racist. And you said it here as well. You seem to make this a central theme of the book, and have you gotten any feedback from your black friends and others about that bold statement? And if so, what has that response been?
Hell, I got feedback from my white friends about that bold statement. One of them is in the room right now. He's like, I don't know about that thing about them not being racist. I'm like, well, so here's the thing. If I want to have a conversation with you, a real one, about systemic things that we want to change, and I start my conversation by saying, hey, look, hey, you racists, can you work with me on something? How likely are you to show up with the spirit of helping me out? You might show up out of the spirit of fear. You might show up out of the spirit of shame, but you're not going to show up out of the spirit of, let me hear what this guy's got to say. You're going to show up saying, I can't wait till he stops talking, which is maybe how you guys are feeling right now. I don't call my friends racist because, quite honestly, how can they be my friends if I truly believe they are racist? I want to define what racist means to me. People who are intentionally waking up in the morning, intentionally doing harm to people of color, black people in particular, and people of color. That's a racist to me. If I call my white friends racist, what do I call the person who's the sheet wearing, cross burning, white supremacist? What do I call them? What word do I give them? Super racist? Like, do I put And so I don't like the term because I think it separates us. Now, again, people call me naive. I've been called accommodating to white people. I'll take all of that if what we get to do together is make progress. So this isn't about how I feel about what you think about my book. Does the book move us to a different place? And that's really why I wrote it. So that's why I don't call my friends racist.
But I think you also do something else. You still hold them accountable
Yeah.
Because you make the statement, you express racism doesn't need a racist.
You read the book
to give it power.
Right.
Can you unpack that a little bit further?
Racism doesn't need a racist to give it power. That's the real point. If we took all the racists in the world and we just shipped them off someplace, Mars, what's the farthest planet? Let's just ship them off to Mars. We still have racism, because racism is embedded in our policies and our practices and our narratives and our approach to housing and public education and health. And so why would I focus on racists when the real problem is racism? And my white friends, we together can work on that. We can look at policies objectively and say, is that disproportionately hurting Black and other people of color? We can look at our public school system, look at our housing situation, look at opportunities for investment, look at Black lawyers who may take 3 years longer to get to partner than their white counterparts. We can look at the things that really matter, that systemically stop us, and we can work on them together. That to me is progress, not the identification of someone as a racist. I'm uninterested in identifying those people who are racist. I'm just not interested. I'm not sure what I get from doing that. And call me too practical. Maybe I'm too much of a business-minded person, but that seems like a waste of resource.
But you do mention about systems that are in place. And some believe in this country that it is systemically rooted in racism, and this country will never rid itself of its original sin, which stems from enslavement, which is entwined with racism. What is your response to that belief that we will never get rid of a system of racism in this country?
Yeah, that's a heavy question. I will tell you, my response is, I hope they're wrong. But I can only hope they're wrong, because today their comments are true. But I also think we sit in a particularly interesting place today if we want to make it interesting. And it is that place where we actually can have better conversation and be more open about solutions. But it goes back to acknowledging and deciding. The original sin needs to be acknowledged and decided. And then we got to, those two things enable everything else. Acknowledge and decide. Acknowledge we've got a problem. Acknowledge it was intentional. Acknowledge it did damage. Acknowledge we still do it. And then decide we're going to do something different. And I think whether it's you and your department that you're leading, or your company that you're leading, and you change how you buy from your suppliers, or you change how you are looking at employees that you hire, or if you're in the community and you're changing how you select board members so that you have a more balanced sphere of influence, that you can have more inclusion in the community. Whatever you're doing, as we start looking at those things together, I think we've got a chance to make that statement not true. It's hard for me to say never on anything. It's just hard, because if it's never, then what are we working for? And so I would have to say to you, it may take a long time, but I say, since it's going to take a long time, we should get started, because every day we waste is another day.
Absolutely. What will your legacy be, right?
Absolutely.
Want to sit by the sidelines, or you get in the game?
Right.
Absolutely. You make a distinction between equity and equality. And I want us to explore this a little bit further. You actually state in the book as well, it is too late to talk about equality. And people struggle with the term equity. Can you clarify the distinction you make and why it is important?
Yeah, sure. And the reason I say it's too late to talk about equality assumes we all started at the same place at the same time. Along lines of race, we didn't start at the same place at the same time. And therefore, equality would only keep us, at best, equal distance behind. If you follow all along, if we start treating everyone equal today, everybody gets treated equal today, right? From here on out. Well, if my family and my ancestors started in a different place than yours, and I'm just saying along race, not micro to your family, so don't get yourself offended and try to tell me where your people came from and all that. That's not what I'm meaning here. I'm talking about in a collective macro sense. Then we will always keep those gaps between each other. What I'm saying is that we've got to use some, I'll just call it common sense, that we built in inequalities for 400 years, which created these gaps. We're going to have to be intentional about closing the gaps through things that may sound to people unequal, right? They may sound unequal, and we can talk about examples. But the truth is, it is trying to close a gap that we intentionally created, not by accident, intention. And we propagated those gaps for years and years and years. And so the difference between equality and equity is this idea that basically in proportion, blacks and other people of color should be in proportion. Judges, CEOs, civic leaders, private company owners and the like. That's what should be if we were in an equitable world. We're not even close.
Thank you. Now, we're, for those that are not aware, we're here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. And in your book, or you mentioned about Edward Gold, who was our inaugural president and CEO here. You said that you modeled your journey after him. And it seems like a nuanced point about a relief of oppression cannot be the real goal of racial equity. And so you're pulling from him. Can you explain that to us? And do you believe people get it about racial equity and the real goal of it?
I've probably done 50 interviews in the first month of this book being out, and not one person's asked me about the chapter on oppression. The release of oppression cannot be our goal. No one's asked me about that chapter. You're referring to Ed Rigaud's freedom journey model, and it's in the book. And in essence, what it's saying is, and I align it to the country's promise: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And in essence, what I'm saying is, when we talk about ridding our country of oppressive things, what happened to George Floyd as an example, everyone can understand that police officer's knee on his neck for that long, watching that man die, is horrendous and wrong, and he got convicted of it. We can all respond to that. But I'll use the lawyer example again. What about the black lawyer who has worked his tail off and it takes him 3 years longer to become a partner? None of us sees that as a problem because, well, he became a partner. He became a partner 3 years later than he should have. Maybe he didn't get the right coaching. Maybe he didn't get the right kind of mentorship. Maybe he didn't get given the right accounts. Maybe. What about the business owner who is only in the first generation of their business and not creating generational wealth? Here's the point about the hierarchy. In order for us to have equity in our country, we have to have a right to life, a right to liberty, which is the ability to express ourselves, but a right to prosper as well at the very top, to self-actualize, to be the best we can absolutely be. We spend too much time, Mel Gravely's opinion, only able to talk about oppression. People who are poor, people who are uneducated, people who are don't have grocery stores, people who don't have access to health care. Though in the United States of America, those should never happen. But what also shouldn't happen is people should not be held back on issues of race, from aspiring to be job creators and wealth creators and leading politicians and leading ballerinas and the whole nine. And I don't see the same conversation in those worlds, because who's going to cry for a rich, relatively rich lawyer who made partner? Nobody. But I cry for them, because until our nation makes all of that equitable, then how much progress have we made? So relieving us from oppression is not my goal. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Edward Gold's freedom model, when you see it, I mean, his freedom journey model is thoughtful. It really is. And it looks a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of need, but Ed just does a really nice job. If you don't know Ed, he's a really big brain, former Procter exec, and the inaugural CEO of the Freedom Center.
I have the privilege of my office is his old office. So
oh, is that right?
Yes.
You got smarter by sitting in his office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I get smarter every day. Yeah. I'm just going to ask a plain, basic question. Why should your audience, your friend, why should they care? Why should people care about it enough to make any real change?
That is the most difficult question of it all. I spent a lot of time talking to my white friends about why they should care, and they gave me answers. Mel, my kids are going to want to work in a more diverse and inclusive kind of place. Well, diversity is going to happen. Don't worry about that. That's coming. That's a number situation. Diversity is coming. Inclusion and equity, I don't know about that, but diversity is coming. Well, Mel, there's a cost to racism that we've got to reconcile. I don't know if you guys knew, but in the mid 90s, we went from 50,000 people in prison to 400,000 people in prison, billions of dollars to imprison people. And at one point, 1 in 3 African-American males between the age of 20 and 29 was in the justice system. Taking out a whole generation, you talk about single mothers, well, take away the men and you end up with single women, right? I digress. So there's a number of practical reasons why. And I think they all make sense. And so if you need a practical reason, as a leader, there's one more reason. As a leader, you're not going to be very successful going forward if you're not able to manage across a group of folks in a way that has equity and inclusion in it, because people aren't going to put up with your stuff anymore if you can't. They're not going to put up with your fears about race, your discomfort about these topics. They're just not going to be engaged and thriving in your presence. And so you're going to struggle. But I go back to the promise of our nation: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If it's not for all of us, we're going to struggle to have it for any of us. Look around at what's going on in the United States of America. We are losing our position in the world because we spend more time pissing around with each other than we do being ready to take on the world in a competitive way. We've lost our mojo around entrepreneurship and education. We're just not as big and bad as we used to be. And I argue that we've lost our mojo because we can't figure out how to acknowledge and decide that, yet we had a tough past around race, but we're also the greatest nation ever created on the planet. And if we can figure out a way to equity together, then we've got this new spirit about us, our new way of being that is enabled and inspired by the ability to be with each other. That's the reason, in my opinion, that this makes sense to me. That's why they ought to care.
Definitely, it's the spirit of investing in each other. And so I saw on news today, I won't mention his name, but someone who's been very critical of Black Lives Matter movement and very critical about any issues that deals with police brutality. And this individual recently had his wife arrested because they thought she was intoxicated when all she had was water and lemonade.
Yeah.
And so now he's outraged. And I think usually what happens is that we can tolerate it until it comes to our to our doorstep.
Yep.
And I'm of the spirit that you need to embrace it even if it's not at your doorstep.
Well, if we're going to be friends, because again, I wanted to cool down this conversation, but I didn't water it down. So if you want a light read, this ain't it. I didn't water down my expectations for what America can be and what I expect from my friends. I didn't water that down. I don't want to send you the message I'm watering it down to you today. My friends have to care about this. Now, how we care is something I'm open to talking about, but my friends have to care because it's in essence core to who I am. And so how can we be friends if you just don't care? Now, if you don't know and you don't, then we're working on that part. That's why I wrote the book. But if you just don't care, it's going to be tough for us to be friends.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to ask one more question, but I want to prepare you. We do have mics, so we can have our Q&A mics hot. And so that for those that may have a question, you're more than welcome to step up to the mic and ask your question. But I'm going to go to this while we may have some individuals that may have a question. And I can keep asking questions as well, because like I said, I have a bank of about 20 to 25 questions that I could ask. But I definitely want to give everyone here the opportunity. Can you frame your vision of our path to equity?
Wow. If I had a magic wand, we'd all have an app. And our app would have a unique path and journey for all of us. That we'd be selecting the things we'd learn, the activities we'd engage in, the changes in our behavior that we would make, the questions we would ask ourselves. This app would be guiding us along the way, telling us that we need to go to racial bias training so we can really understand, am I biased or am I not, and where am I in my bias? It would say to me, I want to change how I hire, and so this app would help me understand who in the community can help me do that, and how do I keep track of my progress. And it would have in it a way to score how we're doing, a way to keep track of how a community, each individual by individual, then collective, like company by company, would be changing who we are and how we are with each other, how we're learning to trust, how we're learning to engage, how our friendships are changing, how we're watching the arts in different ways, how we're reading different things. If I had a magic wand, that's what we'd be doing, because I need evidence. We need evidence that we're committed to something, that we really have acknowledged, and that we've decided that we're going to do something about it. And each of us, our path would be different based on where we sit today, what we already know, and what we're really committed to doing. But it would be a path that you could describe and prescribe for yourself. So Chris, that would be my path there. But in the meantime, I mean, I'm doing all I can to do that, whether it's at ArtsWave, I'm sporting the brand here for ArtsWave, and being as vocal and visible around issues of inclusion there. And by the way, you're not going to find a brand more committed to equity and inclusion than ArtsWave. But I'm trying to do the same thing at CRBC with the CEOs who are there. And many of my friends have lined up with me to push an agenda to help us become more aware and learn about these issues. But that's our path. Our path is our ability to grow enough trust with each other, but enough awareness that we can stop using code words and start using real words to talk about where we are, what we believe, so we can come to agree on certain things and take action on those. I'm never going to get you to agree to everything, Chris. I'm not going to try. But the 3 things we can agree on, we can make progress on. And I think that's progress. We've got to do that. So that's my vision of how we get there, as vague as that might seem.
Thank you, thank you. So in one of the letters you write in the book refers to 2 different contracts with America. What do you mean, 2 different contracts?
Well, I'll use an example to give you 2 different contracts. Let's just take the opioid crisis compared to crack cocaine. You guys ever heard of crack cocaine? Some of you are kind of young. Crack still is a thing, but it's not the thing it was in the 90s. Back in the 90s, crack cocaine was everywhere. I didn't know anyone whose family wasn't devastated by someone who was on that stuff, stealing grandma's TV set, all kind of craziness. And our response as a nation was a criminal response. We responded with a war on drugs, and we incarcerated the people involved. That's how we got that spike in the criminal, in the prison population, 50,000 to 400,000. 80% of the people involved in crack were Black. Fast forward, opioid crisis, just as devastating. I don't know anyone that didn't know someone that, oh my God, their lives, their families, their communities have been touched by the opioid crisis. Our response came from the Department of Health and Human Services. It was a medical problem. We wanted to save lives. We wanted to preserve lives. We didn't want to imprison people. We sent social workers with police officers. We got Narcan on board. We got all kind of training in rehab centers. We haven't beaten the opioid crisis. I don't want to suggest that we have, and I'm not suggesting it's not devastating, but our response was to prosecute drug makers. We had to find blame because it couldn't have been the people involved in the use of opioids, but 80% of them were white. Now, some of you might say, well, we've evolved from the 90s to now. And that could be true. Maybe we learned that didn't work and but it's hard for me to believe that that was the only difference. Part of the difference is who was involved, the face. And I've got other examples. I mean, let's use the stop and frisk law in New York City. New York City, and I've stop and frisk a lot of places, but in New York City, you can basically a police officer can stop anybody they want for darn near anything. If they suspect you did a crime, might do a crime, saw a crime on TV, they can stop you. And they can pat you down. And if they pat you down and they find a vial of crack or coke or marijuana, probably not marijuana anymore, but you get my point. You can be arrested, not for what they stopped you for, which was some kind of crime they thought you were going to commit, but because of what they found in your pocket. Here's the data as reported by the New York City Police Department. This is the data from them. At the height of stop and frisk, 675,000 people were stopped a year. 675,000 people per year. 90%, no crime. Almost 60% of the people stopped were black. 7% were white. If 60% of the people they stopped were white, will we still have stop and frisk? Maybe we would. Maybe it would be fine that white visitors to New York get stopped and frisked. Maybe that. I just find it hard to believe that those numbers make sense. So when I say 2 contracts, the contract we should all have with America is we have certain inalienable rights, right? Right to be presumed innocent, right to a fair trial, inalienable rights. Well, my rights are situational. I get inalienable rights as long as you're not frightened. You don't have a narrative that makes me guilty. Trayvon Martin, this last one. Trayvon Martin, I don't know, 16 years old, down somewhere in Florida. He's approached by a neighborhood watch person. You guys remember this story. He had a hoodie on, earplugs, eating Skittles. The police told the neighborhood watch guy, stand down, don't approach this guy, let him go. But he suspected Trayvon of something. I don't know what. A scuffle ensues. Trayvon is killed. That man has never done a day in jail. And then we took away Trayvon's rights by saying he's history of truancy, and he was truant that day. He had marijuana in his system and a history of smoking marijuana, and therefore, the narrative says he's a bad kid, so it was okay. That's 2 contracts with America, and they're not the same. Now, you might be saying, Mel, you're cherry picking. When you read the book, it's gonna be hard to work your way around the number of examples I can give you that make you say, oh, well, maybe he's got a point there. So I think we've got 2 contracts, but we have 2 contracts because of the narrative that our echo chamber allows us to have. And I say this in the book, and this is hard for people to hear, but today, a black life is worth less than a white life. And people say, well, that's hard for me to hear, Mel. Well, how do you think it feels for me? Right? Sometimes my white friends are so appalled, and I'm like, well, you think I feel good about saying a black life is worth less than a white life? But let's just look at the evidence. That police officer in Minneapolis did not wake up that morning and said, I'm going to kill me one of those black people today if it gets me, right? I'm going to go get me one. He did not. He had disregard for the person under his knee, because that guy wasn't the same kind of man that his brother is, his father is, his next door neighbor is. He was different than them. In what way was he different? I only know one way. Sorry, I went off again, didn't I?
No, excellent. I mean, when you were talking,
Do you feel like sometimes I treat you like I don't need you up here?
no, I didn't say that now. I know my value.
All right, there you go.
I will say, when you talk about the 2 contracts, and since we're in the great state of Ohio, something that I always talk about is the beginning of this state. And when you really research history, you will find at the beginning of a new beginning, race is always a fundamental, essential factor. Ohio becomes a state in 1803. The first piece of legislation, the very, very first piece of legislation, are the Black Codes of 1804. When you talk about contract, I think about standards. There's a different set of standards based on your race of how to live and survive in this country. The Black Codes of 1804 gives credence to that. The Black Laws of 1807, the Ohio Black Laws of 1807, gives credence to that. And so when you think about, when you say contract, I think about the standards being different. And maybe that's also a reason why you understood those standards were different, and why you're like, I can't talk about this conversation right now.
there is no doubt, in the laws, in case you hadn't noticed, Chris is a historian, so he drops out wisdom from this history stuff, and I'm like, dude, I didn't know that. That's good stuff. But you know, these laws that were put in place create a certain behavior in people, both white and black, that keep us in a certain place. And so we talk about the talk that we have, just as an example. I live in Amberley Village. It's a great village. And they give you an option to have a little sticker so that the police know you're from Amberley. Okay? Now you might think, no big deal. I got a brand new car. I kind of like the car. I was thinking, do I put a sticker on it? And my wife was like, you must put a sticker on your car. I want to put a sticker on my kid's forehead, right? Because I want to make sure when they pull them over, driving my car, that they know they're not that black kid. Until we get to a place where I don't have to worry about that, we can't talk about equality because we're just not there. And the truth is, we're just not at that place. I'll just leave it at that, Chris. And some of it has to do with these laws and standards that were set before, and we kind of still operate to today.
Absolutely, yes. Once again,
There was a person at the mic. Did I scare him off from his question? Okay, probably so. Go ahead, Chris.
I will say that you also, in your book, you conclude with 5 ideas you want the reader to consider.
Yeah.
Can you pick one of those important ideas out of those 5 to share with us at this moment?
Do something. One of the 5 is do something. You know, if we're going to talk about it, we got to be about it. So you think, well, what could I do? You can continue to learn more. I think that's a good idea for all of us. I'm continuing to learn more so I can become more aware because I'm embarrassed by what I didn't know and that I learned through this process of writing this book. But do something. Spend your money differently, hire differently, seek to coach differently, grow your skills differently so that you can be a more inclusive and equitable leader. And you can develop all types of talent, not just the talent you're used to embracing. So I would say that of the 5, I would say do something in this space.
Thank you. I will say, you know, we're getting to a point in the conversation. You know, definitely I want to pick up this book here.
You know, the question you didn't ask me that I thought you were going to ask me, that we discussed whether I wanted to answer, was this whole idea of assimilation and did it cost, and did you decide not to go there? Because
I was trying to give the audience enough time let's dive into it. You talk about a couple things in the book. You talk about reparations as well. You talk about reparations and you talk about assimilation. And we touched on it a little bit. And so let's have.
You rather talk about reparations? Somebody say yeah.
Well, I think
someone said yes. Okay, there's somebody in the back that said yes. She's white too, by the way. Just for the record.
Well, let's do this. I think we have time to talk about both.
Okay.
And so what we'll do is then we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
Assimilation.
Yeah.
You know, how has that unfolded for you in your experience, and what is your perspective?
I think I got good at it. But I've seen it. It cost me something. And I can't tell you what it costs. It cost me something about who I am, and I can't. I'm 57. Be 57. Hell, I'll be 57 day after tomorrow. It came on me quick. So, but it cost me something, and I can't articulate what it was because I've never not been me and didn't walk my walk. When I've watched others struggle to assimilate, where they just can't quite ever feel comfortable in majority white groups, where they can't fully be themselves, and we've got to figure out how to find a way for every single person that they don't have to carve off their edges to become an oval to fit into a world that is so monochromatic, that we've got to figure that out. And so I would say that I don't regret the decisions I made, conscious and unconscious. Again, I think it's made me uniquely qualified to be here today. And I've got great, rich relationships with white, black, and everyone in between. But I will tell you that we're missing the value that can be created by people who haven't figured out how to quite assimilate, how to hang out and have beers, how to go on trips with people, how to really articulate the way they need to articulate so they can stay in that room, how to modulate their tone so they're not seen as aggressive. I mean, if I could give $1 for every time I was called aggressive in corporate America, and I'm not an aggressive guy, but I tend to do this, right? And my voice goes up and down, and that's just, you got to manage all that. And I had to learn to manage it. And it costs something. So I would just say to you that assimilation does ask us to leave something about ourselves out of the picture. And I worry that that part we left out is part of the value we can bring. And we got to figure out how to manage it better.
How we can navigate to bring our authentic selves to the table. That's what you
absolutely. And how dare it be that the white standard is the standard, right, in the United States of America? And right now, it is. From how we dress, to how we talk, to how our hair is, to the colors that we wear. I mean, look how I'm dressed. I got the most boring one.
Well, that's why I came all dressed in black. I just wanted to make a statement. Absolutely. We will get to the reparations questions, but I believe we have a question from.
We have to, because she said you want to talk about reparations. I don't know who that is. I wish she'd have her mask on. Yes.
All right, Mel, just a reminder, you have 100 people online as well.
Yeah.
So this is coming from one of your friends there. Companies have included equity to DE&I initiatives. What are some ways or examples of equity practices that companies should be following right now?
Wow. Well, so first I want to make sure I'm very clear. I am not an expert on how to. If you read the book, I reference the great minds in this space. So with all of that said, I will say to you that if we're not measuring something, we don't care enough about it. So if you're still stuck on, well, that's a quota, then you got a problem. You've got to be measuring what it is important to you that you drive equity in. I think that's very, very important. But then you've got to be careful about how you go about it. I'll give my own example. I wanted our craft division in our company to be 20% Black people. I gave that edict to the team. They made it 20% Black people. And they forgot about productivity, they forgot about coming to work on time, they forgot about staying at work all day, but it was 20% Black. So you got to be careful that you don't get something that kind of confirms the narrative that is negative. But I keep telling people the same thing. If you really want to be great at something, do what people who want to be great do. You get the best minds to advise you on it. I don't try to solve my own legal problems. I don't try to solve my own, sustainability problems. I call great minds and I get that advice to say, based on my environment, help me solve for this, because this matters to me. And I would say the same thing about equity practices. There's some great practitioners out there, and that's what they ought to be doing. And I don't mean to sidestep it, Amy, but it really isn't my expertise to tell people how. I can't even, we're navigating this space ourselves at Triversity.
almost like going to health professionals, right, to get about matters that deals with health versus politicians, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Stop it.
So my question is, how do you talk to your white friends or colleagues about the use of the N-word? Because
The use of the N-word?
Yes, because I feel like in our community, it really isn't an agreement that we want to rid our community of saying the N-word. We really don't want people outside of our community and white people to use it.
Right.
So how do you explain that boundary? That it's more of a boundary, not really of something that we want eradicated.
Yeah, I'm at an age where none of my white friends would ever use the N-word. So I can't even give you an example of where they would. I can't imagine one of my white friends using it like, ooh, that would, I'm not even sure they could spell it. Like, I just don't think they would say it. But here's what I want to say, and I don't mean to be flip. Things like the N-word, Mel's opinion, are a distraction from the real efforts. So look, what I mean by that is, if I get you to stop using the N-word, but I don't get you to change how you hire, and I don't get you to change how you buy, your supply chain buys, did I get any real progress because you stopped using the N-word? I feel better because you stopped using the N-word, but I actually want you to do better. I want to move toward equity. I think the N-word, just like races, is in our way, but the stopping you from using the N-word or taking down a statue of some racist Civil War leader, that doesn't move me to equity on its own. We've got to have activities behind it. And so I just always caution people, be careful of the distraction of terms and words. With that said, though, I don't have much input on the N-word because I'm just I do have one friend who is black who uses the N-word so often, but he doesn't use it around me because I just don't like that word. That's all I can give you, though. I apologize. I don't have a deeper thought.
Okay, so you don't see it as a sense of just a respect level and a boundary level as opposed to something that's in the way?
Yeah.
Like as just as a thing as like you want your friends to see you. Like when you were saying how you don't see your friends as racist, but they don't really have a good view of black people.
Right.
But it's like, why don't they look to you as their friend, as their view of black people? This is the person that they see. This is the person that interacts, and he happens to be a black man. So how isn't that translated to other black people?
Yeah. Again, if I understand what you're saying, what I'm telling you is I don't have any white friends that use the N-word in front of me, at least. So I don't have a frame.
I mean, besides the whole N-word, just
Okay.
as the sense of you're saying with your friends.
Take the map down a
Oh,
little
I'm
bit. So we
sorry.
can hear.
Just in the sense of you're saying with your friends that they don't have an idea of blackness,
Right.
and that you can't create that for them, but it's like you already have.
Right.
Just with your existence as their friend.
Yeah.
So how is that not them not seeing you? And how is that a true friendship if they don't see you and they don't see blackness in the likeness of you?
Yeah, I'm not.
And
I'm
how
just
they
not,
correlate that to the rest of Black America.
I was supposed to follow that, and
I'm sorry.
I'm just not. That's okay. So I would say this: I don't want to be all of black to my white friends. So I don't. I want them to have a full breadth of understanding of black people and cultures in general, black, brown, and others. But I just didn't follow you. I apologize. We can talk after, and I promise I'll try to do better.
I think to chime in, I think
It's me not listening. I apologize.
this might be helpful. When you talk about, I would prefer people to see me as a human being, to have empathy for me. Often they look at me, I'm a big guy. Did you play football? That it automatically goes to something that's dealing with athletics or performance and whatnot. But to tell them, yes, I'm a scholar. I work at this national museum. When the public sees me and not knowing what I do or knowing me in depthly, that's automatically what they go to. And so in that, you talk about your friends, that might not have the same racial makeup of you. You want them to see your humanity. That's what you want them to see, because that guides them to having empathy about the struggles that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis that relate to race. And so we're going to take one other question, and then we're going to conclude with reparations. Yes.
The lady
Hi,
up here is
Melvin.
leaning in now on reparations.
Hi, Melvin. My name's Tarita Preston. Nice to meet you. A statement and a question. I really appreciate you bringing this book to us, writing it, and really during this time. And I want to kind of challenge everyone in the room because, to your point, this system persists because it's a system, and it's a system that's upheld by people. So it's always great for everyone, no matter what color, to ask the question of, okay, but how have I created, supported, or condoned racism or injustices? Some of us may not have created it, yet some of us definitely support it, and we condone it by not saying anything, by not calling to action, by not having these conversations. And this book, to me, seems a great invitation for that, right? And a question for you, how has writing this changed you on the inside and the outside?
Well, first of all, I don't know you, but I know you. And I'm not surprised by such an insightful question. If you read the Business Courier article, the reporter said you had a feeling when you talked to this guy that he knew that his life was going to change forever after this book. This book has made me much more clear about how I got where I am, what's going on where I sit, and the influence I can have right now. I'm just much more clear about it. So it's harder to get me to do things that distract me from it. I don't sit around and talk about race all the time, and I don't want to talk to people about race all the time. I want us to live out our lives in a way that is equitable and full of inclusion. And it shouldn't have me at every dinner table talking about race. But I will tell you that writing this book, it cleared out stuff that maybe I could have dealt with 25 years ago, but I wasn't ready and probably wasn't in the right place to do. So in a lot of ways, it's changed me. And I think if you ask me that question again in 3 years, remember, it's been 30 days of the book being out, and appreciate that it's selling well. But in a few years, I'll likely be in a different place. Thanks for that question.
I would imagine it probably has lightened the load for you. It's almost, you kind of took this burden that you've been carrying, this conversation that you've been having with yourself and not been able to share publicly. You're like, you know what, I'm gonna take it off from my shoulders and I'm gonna put it into this book.
Yeah, but now I carry the burden of carrying that book, right? And I tell you, the person that got surprised the most is my wife, who, if you guys know her, is super quiet, super laid back, loves not being seen. And she's like, no, we're just all up in this now, huh? I'm like, yeah, I think we are all up in this now. So where we sit.
Well, before you get on Oprah or anything else, remember you were here at the National.
This is where it all started, baby.
That's right.
Where it all started.
And give her a good word for me. So we're going to conclude with this question. You make a bold statement about reparations. You're in favor of it. Could you explain?
Yeah, someone asked me just this past week, what was the biggest surprise I found in writing the book? It was reparations. I was against reparations, always have. What a ridiculous idea. I can't even believe we're having this conversation about reparations until you go do research. What's the guy's name? Stuart Oliver. He's the comedian guy. Look up Stuart Oliver's, whatever his name is, John Oliver. Look up his on YouTube, his episode on reparations. This guy articulates reparations tighter than you. In 30 minutes, you'll be like, oh, maybe I didn't understand. Here's why I make the argument. There is a gap. If we just look at wealth, there is a gap that is so staggering that we'll never close it. $188,000 median wealth for white people, $24,000, and I may be off by a couple thousand, but I'm close. 7.8 times more wealth in the average white family than the average black. And you might think, well, what about people like you that have gotten to the top 10% of income? The top 10% of income, black and white, is still 4 times difference in wealth. It's staggering, the gap. So if we don't do reparations, please God tell me, what will we do? Because the wealth gap's getting worse. See, this is a secret. Once you're actually wealthy, that money makes money even when you're not doing anything. And then you pass it on to the next people and it makes money while you're not doing anything. Meanwhile, we're worried about income and there's wealth over here, right? And so it's staggering and getting worse. And if you think about how the nation was built and how wealth was created from land ownership to agriculture, then to the industrial sector, and how we systematically, by law, kept black people out of it and leveraged their talents in it. I've got a couple lawyers in the room. This is an open and shut case for reparations. And you might say, well, Mel, what do you mean by reparations? I want a check written to descendants of enslaved people in the United States. That's what I want. Now, you might say, well, you can't have it. Okay, I'm just telling you what I want. I'm no longer going to articulate what I think I can convince you to do. I'm going to tell you what I think it ought to be, and then we can back away from there. One last thing I'll say about reparations. Well, my black friends don't even like reparations, most of them. Their argument is they will just waste the money. Well, first of all, I'm insulted. I wouldn't waste the money, so give me mine.
Amen.
Second, and I got a third, but second, if people waste their money, it's theirs. Let them waste it. So why would you be against reparations? If they're going to waste it, they're going to buy the things you say, gym shoes, blah, blah, blah. Well, then that means they will give it back to the white people. So like, it's still good for white people. Like, this could work out, right? The last thing I'll say is, here's the face of reparations for Mel Gravewood. There's a single mom. I'll pick a real community living in Bond Hill. She's got 2 kids. Kids are in elementary school. If she got an $80,000 check in reparations, She could make a down payment on a house in your neighborhood in Sycamore Township or in Montgomery and send her kids to Sycamore Public Schools. They'd have a different friend set, a different set of resources available to them in their schools. They might get a scholarship to a different college. It could change their lives forever and break the cycle of poverty that she probably inherited from her mother, who inherited it from her mother, who inherited it from her mother. I don't know how else to solve it. There was reparations already. When enslaved people were set free, they cut a deal and they gave them land, 40 acres and a mule. You ever heard that? The mule part probably wasn't all that true, but the 40 acres was real because that's what a family could do to sustain their lives. And within months at least, Lincoln was killed, Andrew Johnson became president, he gave all the land back. So reparations is not like a stupid new idea. By the way, the Jews got reparations, created the state of Israel.
Other groups that
worked out for them too. Right. So I'm simply saying there are models to follow. There's a lot to figure out. Put some smart people in the room. I know more than half the people in here are like, no way on reparations. Read that chapter and come back to me and tell me my argument doesn't make sense. Come back to me and say, you're a nut job. It'll never work. I don't think you'll be able to because I convince my own self. You know, that's hard to do, right? When you don't believe something, I like talk myself into it. Then I had to talk myself into leaving it in the book because there were a lot of people said, leave it out because it'll be a distraction from the message you're trying to carry. But I had some white friends say, I disagree with you completely about reparations, but I think you ought to leave it in because the argument makes sense. So that's my position on reparations. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. So I would definitely say one of the key messages is this book is an unwrapping. It is an introduction into the conversation. It is not the conclusion of the conversation. It's not the middle part of the conversation. And so I believe it's very critical for us to understand that we must do the work to educate ourselves about race, have the courage. We have principles here that we lifted from the Underground Railroad: courage, cooperation, and perseverance. When we broach this subject about race in this country, we must have courage. We must have the willingness to cooperate with each other, and we must have the ability to persevere. And so I want to thank you tremendously for writing this book, sharing your thoughts, sharing your insight with us. And so I'm going to lead you to the signing. So everyone here will get a copy of the book and get it signed by you. And I'm going to ask our president, Mr. Woody Keon, to provide us with some closing remarks. But can we give Mel Gravely a hand of applause, please?